A huge trade deadline day for the Pittsburgh Steelers, dealing away Chase Claypool for a second-round pick and getting back William Jackson for basically nothing. I'm going to talk about both of those trades and the Steelers' outlook here with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko. We are both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we're here breaking things down on the Steelers trade deadline. Remember, you can find this show Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, but especially on YouTube. Like the video if you see it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of the Post-Gazette's video content on our YouTube channel. Also, today's episode is brought to you, as always, by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure. Fan Advantage, no apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure. Fan Advantage, and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian, we thought it would just be a nice, peaceful Tuesday. We get a little locker room. We watch a little practice. We get to talk to some coordinators. It was just going to be a nice little bye week. And then Omar Khan happened. The Steelers trade away Chase Claypool. They get back a second-round pick. The Bears actually second-round pick for that. Then they shortly after that, it's announced that they get William Jackson, the third cornerback for the Washington Commanders, for what is a conditional flip of a sixth-round pick from the Steelers and a seventh-round pick from the Commanders in 2025. So nothing, basically, at that point. Brian, we'll get to William Jackson in a bit. What was your first thought?
Don't sleep on that 2025 sixth-rounder, Chris. All right, that guy's going to be a stud for the Commanders.
Conditional sixth-rounder, by the way. like there's some factor here that might still mess that up.
The condition is whether Earth still exists or if it blew up in some sort of nuclear worldwide war.
Hey. We don't need to get negative on this podcast, but it's possible it will happen. But anyways, give me your first thought. We're in the locker room. This happens. Were you still in the locker room when you realized it happened?
No, I'd actually already left out because I'm kind of like, all right, I got what I needed here. Didn't even necessarily think that there could be a live hug watch. But yeah, it was surprising. I thought it was the most intriguing trade option because I figured if Mitch Trubisky or more likely Mason Rudolph would get dealt, it'd be for a minimal return and it would be a minimal impact on the current team. Claypool was the one that even when I was asked about him in my chat on the Post-Gazette site Monday, I said, it could happen. It's hard to say because I don't know exactly how the rest of the league is going to value him, right? Like you knew the quarterbacks weren't going to have a ton of value on him because mostly everybody's healthy around the league at quarterback at deadline time. You'd have to be really desperate to send more than a sixth or seventh round pick for one of those guys. But Claypool could go any which way. So I said I lean toward no, but we'll see what the Steelers think. And now we know what the Steelers think. He was not worthy of declining an offer for a second-round pick. And, yeah, very, very interesting. Big move for them. Pretty unprecedented move for them. Sure, they sent away Melvin Ingram on this day last year, but he wasn't playing much at that point.
Right.
He clearly didn't want to be there. Now I think we have a bit of an indication that maybe Chase Claypool didn't necessarily want to be here or at the very least was okay with leaving.
I mean, here's the one thing. I'm not sure that like Chase Claypool wasn't a hostage at this point. You know, like Melvin Ingram, it was pretty clear he wanted out. And but I mean, Chase Claypool, he was fighting like in the game against the Eagles, even while they were down. You saw him catch a pass and charge forward into three defenders and fight for a third down conversion. You saw him throw a touchdown on a jet sweep and look, ecstatic about doing so. And then even on social media, he posted pictures. He got to take pictures with his guys. He said, last day with the boys, I appreciate all you guys. And he was hanging out with them. Like, I don't think there's any ill will from Chase Claypool about the Steelers. It's just, you know what? He knows, and I think everybody knows, except the Chicago Bears apparently, that the Steelers weren't going to be able to pay this guy, at the end of next season, which to me is why I didn't think that the Bears or anyone would offer a second-round pick for a guy that the Steelers couldn't keep around.
Yeah, I think what he also knows, though, is there just wasn't quite enough targets and touches to go around in this
Yeah.
Steelers offense. Like Claypool, I think, is the type of competitor we've seen it his first few years in the league. Really no off switch for him. Like you said, Chris, he was still out there throwing blocks. He was picking up yak. I mean, he's a fiery guy, sometimes to his own detriment, as we've seen with the penalties that he really kind of cleaned up in year 3 as a credit to him. But we know that he liked to talk some junk. He is very competitive, so it's not like he was mailing it in. However, I do think that, you look back at some of the comments he'd made after games and even down in the Philly locker room on Sunday. A few of us were kind of around his locker afterward, asked if he wanted to talk, and he declined, which is kind of unusual for him. So we know after the Dolphins game, he made some remarks about not having a go ball all year, that they needed to scheme things up. So it just makes you wonder if that's what he was comfortable saying publicly, which it wasn't anything crazy, but that's what he was comfortable saying publicly. What was he saying privately? I think he liked being in the slot, which was a new thing for him this year, now that the Steelers went out and got George Pickens. But with George Pickens, with Deontay Johnson, I just think this receiver room in Pittsburgh, especially with how much they're struggling to throw the ball, maybe just a little too crowded, not quite big enough for the 3 of them. And I don't think he liked that, the middle of the field was not an area where the Steelers were thriving, to say the least. And now he's going to go somewhere. I'll be curious to see how exactly Chicago uses him. If they get him back into that outside role, I actually think he's actually a little bit better as a big slot on the inside. But maybe the Bears will move him around more than the Steelers did, and maybe simply having a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to the targets will unlock something in Chase Claypool that had eluded him here for the last, year and a half.
Yeah. I think that there's a big part of that too is, Chase Claypool wanting to go somewhere where he knew that he had the future, or he was part of the future. And, I think you can read the writing on the wall, as his agents probably did, even though he said, I don't talk to my agents about that. My agents deal with that kind of stuff. But anybody knew that Chase Claypool, with Deontay Johnson being paid and George Pickens being George Pickens right behind him, Chase Claypool was in a hard spot, and he wasn't going to get that contract. He wasn't going to get that contract now. And I think that he realized that. So he's like, you know what? It's better to get out. But he also doesn't want to come off as the malcontent, because, last year, like you said, he had several of those punts. Like, after the Steelers lost to the Browns 2 years ago, and he said, they're going to get clapped by the Chiefs or something like that. And then, last year you had the pointing in Minnesota. You had, like, oh, let's play music in practice. There was a lot of comments like that about, he didn't take this game seriously enough. And to Chase Claypool's credit, I thought he handled this year a lot more maturely than he did last. I thought that he, the effort that you saw out there was more consistent. I thought that there was, there was a sense of maturity definitely over last year. But I agree. Like, there was a sense of, like, you know what, like, maybe I don't need to be here. I'm just shocked. They got the Bears' actual second round pick in this trade. Omar Khan, I think, works some magic that I never thought they were. I thought the best that they would get was a late third round pick for Chase Claypool. I just wasn't sure if that was what they were going to trade him for.
Yeah, that's why you couldn't really say no if you were the Steelers, right? I mean, to get a top probably 45 or at worst top 50 pick, I think, for a guy who, not probably became the odd man out when you draft George Pickens in the second round and you pay Deontay Johnson on a 2-year contract extension. Just hard to say no. And for Claypool, could it blow up in the Steelers' face? I guess if he goes to Chicago and puts everything together, looks like the rookie in 2020 who I thought was going to be with the Steelers for a decade because of the combination of the size, the speed. He was making contested catches that year. He had much better ball skills, so it could end up looking like a bad trade. But I think right now in the moment, it's very, very difficult to disagree with this move by the Steelers, and anything else would kind of be revisionist history given how little he had been involved this season and how much consistency was a struggle for him ever since that breakout year as a rookie.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about this trade, not just for the offense, for also for Kenny Pickett, and for what a second round pick gets you where the Bears are. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at Liquid Death. If you're out there tailgating, you see someone crushing a tall boy and they're not looking drunk, they're actually staying hydrated. It's probably because they're drinking not a can of beer, but a can of Liquid Death. What's Liquid Death? Well, it's the best mountain spring water that money can buy out there in a can, not in a bottle. So it's fresher, colder, and better tasting. And why do they call it Liquid Death? Well, it's here to murder your thirst and also murder plastic pollution, because 10% of the profits from every can sold of Liquid Death goes to fight plastic pollution across the planet. So you're helping out the planet and you're helping out yourself, an all-around healthy decision by going with some Liquid Death that you can find anywhere, but especially at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or a county fair, and literally anywhere. Or if you want to find a Liquid Death retailer near you, use their store locator tool located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. We're also brought to you today by Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice if the holidays were stress-free? A hot tub, swim spa, or sauna from Valley Pool and Spa will help you feel like it is. Relax and soak in a hot tub or swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Refresh and rejuvenate in a Finleo sauna that is sure to melt your stress away faster than a frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in stock hot tubs, swim spas, and more hot tubs. Visit valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com for the offer. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We're talking about from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette about more about the Claypool trade. Again, we'll get to William Jackson in the third segment, but I want to look at this more. First of all, let's talk about what this actual second-round pick means, Brian, because as it stands, the Steelers would have, I believe, the 5th pick in the NFL draft. If the draft was to happen today, it would also mean that the Bears will have given them the 43rd pick in the NFL draft. So you're looking at 3 picks in the top 43 of the upcoming NFL draft. I'm not so certain that the Steelers end up still in the top 5 of picking. I'm not sure if they'll end up in the top 10. And we could talk about that more Friday too, when we're looking at, the outlook for the season out of the bye week. But as of right now, you're still looking at probably 2-3 top 50 picks here to legitimately look at. And this is part of what a rebuild looks like, getting these kind of assets.
And you can package them all together and move up and pick Bryce Young. Wait, no, I'm just kidding. No, so
don't start that on this show.
Yeah, I mean, in the first segment, I mentioned, basically global annihilation, and even worse would be drafting over Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh. But even worse than nuclear holocaust is if Kenny Pickett was cast to the side. Yes, so absolutely. I mean, there's going to be a lot of holes and a lot of needs on this roster next year, Chris, as you know. I mean, beyond the obvious of guys who are going to become free agents, your Cam Suttons, various other players on the defense, Devin Bush, Terrell Edmonds, you're going to have an offensive line that you'll have another season to evaluate some of these young guys, Dan Moore Jr., Kevin Dotson, and even the free agents that you brought in this year. Were they a good fit? Were they not? So you're going to have a lot of different ways that you can go with these 3 picks. If you're the Steelers, if you want to, you could package 2 of them and maybe have 2 first-round picks. So it's a good way for them to jumpstart this rebuild, maybe speed up the process a little in 2023, whether it's like I said, replacing guys on the defense or filling in around Kenny Pickett with a supporting cast that, kind of similar to what this deal does for the Bears, gives them a chance to really get a better evaluation of Justin Fields, so that you can't say, well, we had nobody to throw to. Maybe you can build around Kenny Pickett a little bit more with some of these future assets.
I agree, because the part of this rebuild is going to be finding one. Our buddy Doran Dickerson, the former Pitt tight end, who now does a lot of work around. He works at Channel 11, 93.7 The Fan, a lot of places in Pittsburgh. But he said none of those 3 picks should be into any guy that's under 300 pounds, and and basically saying they got to load up in the trenches. But the Steelers, I think with the last few draft classes, they've kind of haven't been in position to go get the premier offensive lineman, the premier defensive lineman, Jordan Davis, Christian Darrisaw, like, those big, bigger type of names, that are now becoming, key players in the trenches for other teams. The Steelers would have had to trade up to get. And, I think the Steelers were in a position where it's like, look, we're already missing a lot of talent. We need every pick we can get to kind of keep building right now. But you're right that this is the chance where if they finish, even if they somehow rally for anywhere between 7 and 9 wins this year, like, say they go crazy in this second half, they're still going to get some really good picks out of this and an opportunity to reinvest. And like you said, also when you have 2 second-round picks, you'll have a 3rd-round pick. Help me out. Do they have a comp pick coming this year?
Well, we'll find out, how that formula works, but it's always possible, right?
Right.
Based on guys leaving in free agency. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to have resources. And remember, when we went back to last season, or this past year's draft, they only had 6 picks, and Kevin Colbert was pretty upfront about, we didn't have a ton of those later picks that you can kind of use to trade up in certain spots. And you're right, Chris. I mean, when people sit here and say, why is the O-line not better? Why didn't they draft some guys on the D-line? It didn't really fall their way. They would have had to make some bold moves to kind of move up and get people, which at the time, it's kind of like, man, what are you going to use to do that? Then in retrospect, you say, well, they should have to get such and such players. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, the drafting has not been elite for the Steelers recently, far from it, especially some of those mid-round picks. But you feel good about the choices they've made on a lot of 1st and 2nd round picks lately. They're going to get a chance to do more of that. And when it comes to the current team, the current offense, removing Claypool from the equation, sure, it'd be nice to have Calvin Austin, healthy and on the field as a slot receiver rather than, sitting in a hospital room as he's doing after having foot surgery, I think today. So that's a bummer, but it's not about this year. Like you said at the top, they're not going anywhere this season. They know that. This isn't a Super Bowl team that you're taking a number 3 option away from. They can also kind of use this, I think, as a means to sort of recalibrate their entire approach on offense. If you want to try to get Najee Harris untracked, if you want to try to play more of a ball control game to help out Kenny Pickett, well, now you can play, more 12 personnel with Zach Gentry and Pat Freiermuth. You can use Connor Hayward as sort of a hybrid player in your slot. And if you do want to continue in the mode that you've been into this point, maybe you play Deontay Johnson inside if you think he's capable of that. Maybe you put Steven Sims in there in kind of an audition. It doesn't really matter. It's just a situation where things are going to change now without Claypool. But in the long run, you're hopefully, knock on wood, if you're the Steelers, you're going to make good draft decisions, and it's going to pay off for 4 or 5 years as opposed to getting one more season and a half out of a player who has potential, but it just hasn't always been there for him.
No, I agree, and I say, I say, like, I think this is a really good move for the Steelers because, again, they spent the 49th pick in the NFL draft to get Chase Claypool in 2020. Even if the Bears improve, they're 3-5 right now. I don't think they're going to get that much better. Even if they improve to maybe having
tough schedule left, really tough schedule.
They do. But let's give them some grace. Let's say they improve a little bit and they move back to the 47th pick. You're still getting a higher pick 3 years later in the 2nd round than you spent to even get Chase Claypool in the first place. So basically, you had him for free almost.
Yeah, and I'm not one of these people who always says, get the picks because, like, you hear some of the very, very outlandish takes of, just trade TJ Watt for a king's ransom right now.
Please. No, that's not how this works.
Having a 1st round pick, let alone a 2nd in the NFL, hardly guarantees that you are getting an impact player. You do your due diligence, you study as much as you can, you prep for the draft, and you still have to just have some hope that the inexact science that is college prospect scouting is going to fall your way. But in this case, for a player who I don't think is really going to add many, if any, wins to your final total, then yeah, I mean, at that point, I think they did have to move on from him given the return. And I guess we should mention too that several reports now, I think Aaron Rodgers even pretty much let it slip that the Packers also offered a second for Claypool. And to Omar Khan's credit, he kind of kept the line out there in the water and got the Bears to bite on it as well. So, other teams were interested in this guy. Like I said, it could be one that doesn't age well for the Steelers if he
if he blows up, sure.
And if he makes Justin Fields look like Ohio State Justin Fields again. But I think you have to feel good about this deal at the moment and go pick up Gunnar Olszewski in your PPR league. I don't know.
In your PPR league. I say Steven Sims.
PPR.
Yeah, geez. But I feel you in a lot of ways with the Chase Claypool thing. Who knows? He might blow up. We see he has potential, but you weren't unlocking it right now. And you know what? 4th-year Chase Claypool will probably end up looking better than whatever second-round player they get for him next year. But will 7th and 8th year Chase Claypool have been more valuable to the Steelers than that pick that they get maybe a top tier offensive lineman? And I know some people think, well, what about, don't you need a first round? Like, yeah, you could, but Marcus Gilbert was a big part of the rebuilding of the Steelers offense in the early 2010s. He was a 2nd round pick. Stephon Tuitt was a 2nd round pick. You could get guys that can be key contributors for many years, off of 2nd round picks. So I do think there's a big piece there that you could talk about. We also got to talk about the other trade, William Jackson III, because in my opinion, the Steelers, Omar Khan deserves an A day for what he did in these trades to make this happen. We'll talk about that more on the North Shore Drive podcast in a minute here. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers in the Berg, of course, your number one place for Pittsburgh sports apparel. The Steelers campaign off and running. You got the Penguins playing. You can show your support for all your black and gold teams by going to Yinzers in the Berg. They have two legendary stores in the Strip District. Plus, they have a growing online store at yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com. They have all the Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and so much more. Check out their website if you're not in Pittsburgh, or if you're in Pittsburgh and next time you're heading down to the Strip District, be sure to look out for either one of their stores. But again, check them out online, yinzerspgh.com.
If you bought a Chase Claypool jersey from Yinzers, you're going to have to go back and get somebody new.
You got to get something new because they're going to have a lot of people new, especially if you have some Kenny Pickett. They're going to have them. And who knows, they might already have some William Jackson III gear if you're that kind of a Steelers fan. Either way, go to Yinzers in the Berg right now. Again, yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Brian, William Jackson III. Way long ago, you were covering the Steelers in the 2016 NFL draft, weren't you?
I was not. No.
You were covering Pitt at the time.
I was covering Pitt at the time, but I mean, does anybody in this city forget the Artie Burns pick? Chris?
Oh, no. No, nobody does.
So gather around, children. Let Christopher Carter tell you about the 2016 first round.
The first round of the NFL draft, the Steelers, everybody in the world knows that they want a cornerback. And it's pretty not well-kept secret that they're zeroing in on William Jackson III. And then all of a sudden on draft night, the pick before the Steelers are up, the Bengals trade up and they get William Jackson III, which seemed absurd to get William Jackson III when they already had 2 first-round cornerbacks on their roster. So they added a third, and you're like, what the heck is that about? So then the Steelers panic in the moment, and they say, well, we'll get the next guy on our list. It's this guy out of Miami, Artie Burns, who had some good numbers. He has a good height and size and speed. Maybe he can work out. And then he turned out to be a complete bust. They didn't sign him back. He's still somewhere in the NFL floating around. He was on the Bears for a bit. I don't know, but he
might be on Seattle. I'm gonna Google that real quick.
Something like that, but it was not worth it. The Steelers lose out on that value, and clearly they messed up. The Bengals get William Jackson III. He's a decent cornerback for them for a few years. He guards Antonio Brown in a couple of games, and is pretty feisty. But they don't sign him long term because they're in the middle of their rebuild. He goes on to the Washington Commanders. It's kind of okay there, nothing spectacular, but now he's back with the Steelers, and it's for nothing. They get him. The trade compensation here, Brian, was their 6th round pick in 2025 and they get back a 7th round pick in 2025. So literally, there's a conditional, not even a conditional swapping of 6th and 7th round picks 3 years down the line, I'll literally be 36 years old when that happens. If it happens.
I guess we don't know what the conditional is, right?
Right. Because that's the thing, is that if the condition is that
right?
William Jackson III starts X amount of games and he doesn't,
Sure.
they don't even get that. Like, they don't even lose
Right.
that. But who cares if in 2025 you have a seventh round pick instead of a 6th round pick? If this guy, if William Jackson III is really good, you killed this trade. If he's bad, you lost nothing. Nothing. There's nothing you lose about it. And anyone that's like, oh well, his salary cap is pretty high in 2023. None of it's guaranteed. When you trade for a player, you lose. None of that dead money comes with him. Yes, he's owed $12.75 million. I guarantee you, if he's good, they renegotiate that down to a few years. They spread it out the money so he gets paid. Maybe he's making like $5 or $6 million next year. If he's bad, they cut him in. Oh well, they swapped picks, the 6th and 7th round picks in the 2025 NFL draft. Like,
yeah, I mean it's a low risk, possibly high reward signing. Jackson's 30. He's got a back injury that's kept him out for the second half of this. Well, for the past 3 or 4 weeks of this season. Dude might be washed, but Mike Tomlin and the Steelers have liked making these kinds of trades. They like to bring in high pedigree, first round type talents, and this is a case where I assume he's going to be on the active roster because that's why you trade for him. But remember they brought in a guy like Carl Joseph last season, who I think was also class of 2016 in the draft, and Tomlin liked him coming out of West Virginia, so they stashed him. He's still stashed. He's injured, but he's on injured reserve. So, vastly different, but Minkah Fitzpatrick was somebody they loved in the pre-draft process, and they circled back around on him. So this is something that they've made a habit of doing. Jackson, again, for all we know, could be on his last legs. It's not like he's lost his starting job, but apparently he wasn't playing real well. Maybe that's a result of the back injury that he's dealing with, but there was also a report out there, I think from Josina Anderson, that he wanted to come here. Pittsburgh was his preferred destination. So maybe he was watching AJ Brown dunk on Ahkello Witherspoon left and right Sunday and was like, I can do that. But, here he comes. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens there. It's a move by the Steelers that could amount to nothing. He was going to get cut probably by the Commanders if they didn't find a trade partner. Steelers essentially just jumped the line to go ahead and bring him in now. See if he's got anything left in the tank.
Right, exactly. Now, here's what I will say about William Jackson III. As a person who watched him a little bit, and I got to talk to host of Locked On Commanders, David Harrison. He's a film guru himself. And he was telling me, he's like, Chris, I actually see this could work out for you guys because, for Pittsburgh, of course, for the team that I do the Locked On Steelers podcast as well there. But he was talking about how William Jackson III just couldn't fit into what Washington did because they were all about backed off zone play. Didn't ask much of bump and run, and that's where his strength is. When he plays at his best is when he's like, hey, press this guy at the line of scrimmage, be physical with them, run around the field with them, run in one-on-one situations. And when the Bengals asked him to do that, he was successful. When they tried to switch it up and make him do things he was uncomfortable with, that's when more of his mistakes came. You look at his PFF numbers, they're not great. Like, he gives up, he gives up a high completion percentage. He's given up some touchdowns. He doesn't have, the high breakup numbers the last year or so. But at the same time, if it might be a big part of it because he's been asked to do things that are out of his skill set. And part of what my friend David Harrison was saying, he fell out of favor with Jack Del Rio because it was just, he couldn't fit the scheme that they wanted there. So a big part of this could be like, what? All they're asking of William Jackson III is on those plays when Ahkello Witherspoon was getting toasted because he couldn't bump and run with AJ Brown or Jamar Chase. Maybe they're saying, William Jackson III, go do that. You're the 30-year-old veteran. You're 6 foot. You can go out there. You can bang with guys. Do that and just don't get toasted, because in the 2 games that the Steelers haven't been in this year, it's because they've given up those big passes to Gabe Davis and to AJ Brown and the Bills and the Eagles. But every other game, they've been able to limit those plays, take those plays away, and they've had a puncher's chance to win at the end. And the most of them, they still come out on the short end. But with TJ Watt back, that might be a different story.
You think William Jackson gets the PBU against Nelson Aguilar in week 2?
I think so, actually. I think he makes a better play in the football because I think it might not even be as much of a pass breakup. I think he jams him at the line of scrimmage because what he's so good at when I watch him on tape is if he's pressing you, his hands are so much more accurate than what Ahkello Witherspoon has length, and when he's at his best, he can run with you and he can make a good play in the ball. He can get his head turned around. But William Jackson III will jam you and knock you off the timing in your route. So especially with a quarterback who's not that great, Mac Jones, for example, they might not throw that ball because you know what? He might not be as further down the field because he's had to fight more to get off the line of scrimmage. So that ball might not even get thrown, let alone, as far as, maybe a pass breakup happening there. But again, you're looking for guys, this defense, the way it's structured when TJ Watt comes back, they'll have the pass rush will be back. They may not be like league leading or anything again, but they'll be active. I really think with a healthy TJ Watt. And if the pass rush is going and you have cornerbacks that aren't getting beat, to give up easy plays way down the field, I think you put your defense in a really good spot to win a lot more games and to not have to not put the offense in such bad situations so that the offense can just do the little that it can to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every year when the Steelers would play the Bengals, Tomlin would throw out a little line in his, preamble there that William Jackson, they like his length, he's got good speed, he's a physical corner. So, they've kept an eye on him since that pre-draft process where I think our own Jerry Dulac reported that at the time that the Steelers liked Jackson a little bit more than Artie Burns, but they also really liked Artie Burns. Yeah, sure you did. But, I mean, hey, maybe Will Jackson can't run anymore. One thing that's maybe important to note is the Steelers don't exactly make a point of acquiring guys 30 or older, whether it's in free agency or trades. They've started to buck that trend a little bit. Melvin Ingram was one last year. So my point to say there is I think they're kind of acutely aware of, hey, this guy can't run anymore, or this guy just can't do it. We've seen them move on from players specifically in the secondary when they get up there in age, Joe Hayden most recently. So perhaps that is a sign that they do think William Jackson III is not done just yet, but we'll see. Like you said, they can easily get out of it next year if he doesn't prove to be an upgrade over Levi Wallace or Ahkello Witherspoon. So they made the move. They must see something, and we'll see probably next week against the Saints if William Jackson III is able to get out there and get healthy.
We certainly will see. We'll also see this week. Do they have more practices this week, or is the bye week cancel things out?
They are practicing today, Wednesday.
There you go.
It's kind of a short getaway day for the guys, but this current team might need the work. So we'll see if Jackson is able to make it to Pittsburgh today, and perhaps we'll have a chance to catch up with him. If not, we are scheduled to talk to defensive coordinator Terrell Austin. So he should have some insight there. And maybe Mike Tomlin will grace us with some comments as well.
Absolutely. Do check out everything at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where Brian Batko, Ray Fittipaldo, and Jerry Dulac are breaking all things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, check out the North Shore Drive podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and especially YouTube. If you're seeing this on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to get over 1,000 subscribers soon. We're very close, guys. You could be the 1,000th subscriber. That'd be really helpful here to us at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks so much for helping us out. Subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette itself as well to get all of our great content. Thanks again for checking us out. Brian and I will be back here on Friday, recapping everything, getting more thoughts on him from him on the bye week and where the Steelers actually are. We spent a lot of time talking about the trades themselves and what it does specifically, but I want to get his thoughts more on Kenny Pickett, the defense, where this team's headed. Will they finish with a top 10 pick, or will they be pushing for the playoff conversation in December? We'll talk more about that on Friday. We'll see you then right here on the North Shore Drive Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive Podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.